Okay, finally, welcome to the second day of our workshop. This is going to do a short presentation of our guest. Most of you know very well. Monica Jovanovic is assistant professor of philosophy at the Faculty of Philosophy, University of Belgrade, Serbia. Her work explores traditional and contemporary aesthetics and ethics, including Aristotle's conception of tragedy, the British aesthetic tradition, and Kant's philosophy, particularly the critique of judgment. In contemporary aesthetics, she has focused on the legacy of Frank Zigli, among others. We will now hear about shapes, color, and motifs, Kant's aesthetic cognitivism. You have the word.
Thank you, David, and thank you for organizing this wonderful workshop. It's very well organized, perfect, and it is my pleasure to participate in this with Iris and David. So I can start now with my presentation. So the title is Shapes, Colors, Motifs, Kant's Aesthetic Cognitivism, but I will be talking about his meta-aesthetic cognitivism as well, and possible relations between his aesthetic cognitivism and his meta-aesthetic cognitivism, by focusing on shapes, colors, and motifs when it comes to aesthetic cognitivism. So some guiding questions at the beginning. Was Kant an aesthetic cognitivist? He was, definitely. What type of cognitivism can be attributed to him? And how is this related to the thesis that he was aesthetic formalist as well? What is the aesthetic relevance of form and color in the analytic of the beautiful? How this pertains to his view of aesthetic ideas? So some contemporary questions. Still open. Can art teach us something? Does it have cognitive value? What is the relationship between the cognitive value of art and its aesthetic and artistic value? Something similar. Yesterday, Iris formulated in a similar way those two theses of contemporary aesthetic cognitivism. So my goal today will be some kind of conceptual clarification, conceptual analysis. And my other talk on Friday will be a little bit controversial thesis about free play between understanding and imagination. So this will be a kind of introduction to that. So first, to say just a little bit about his meta-aesthetic cognitivism. What is meta-aesthetic cognitivism? A thesis that when I say X is beautiful, that is a real statement, a real proposition with truth conditions, truth value. It can be correct or incorrect, true or false. When I say X is rectangular, for example, that is a real proposition. And the claim that X is beautiful is proposition in that sense. So, and what is the problem for Kant here? Because he was meta-aesthetic anti-realist. He said that beauty is not a real property of the thing. When I say X is beautiful, I'm not ascribing a real property, and I'm not deducing from some general concept or general rule whether the thing is beautiful or not. I'm not following rules, I'm not inferring, I'm not deducing that something is beautiful. I do it by acquaintance, not by description. So the problem is that anti-realist thesis, in a combination with his meta-aesthetic cognitivism, if I claim that X is beautiful, is a real proposition, and that beauty is not a real property of an object, what makes those truth conditions? What is truth maker of that proposition? It's a huge gap. And we have to say this would be one caveat, that aesthetic judgments are not cognitive judgments. When I say that he was meta-aesthetic cognitivist, I don't mean that judgments of taste are cognitive judgments. Cognitive judgments are for him objective, theoretical, logical, and we come to them by deducing from some general premises. different epistemologically. So it's not by acquaintance. It's when I say this is rectangular or this is a chair, I'm subsuming individual under the universal by using my power of judgment, determining power of judgment, not reflective. So epistemology is different, maybe ontology is different, maybe not. But this is important. He can't be meta-aesthetic cognitivism without claiming the judgments of taste are cognitive. It's a different thing for him and for his usage of those words. So this is some evidence that he was a meta-aesthetic anti-realist. When we call something beautiful, the pleasure that we feel is expected of everyone else in the judgment of taste is necessary, just as if were to be regarded as a property of the object. So it's not property of the object, the same it is. Yeah, because beauty is nothing by itself without relation to the feeling of the subject. Nothing in itself. So ontological status of beauty is under the question. It's not a property. So some possible solutions from contemporary philosophy to bridge this gap. Mostly from ethics. Theory of error. John Mackey's theory of error. It's a kind of combination of cognitivism and anti-realism. So he thinks that all judgments, moral judgments, when I say something is morally right or morally wrong or prohibited or not, this is a real proposition with truth value. But at the same time, there are no moral facts. He was projective, like Humean projectivist. So how to reconcile this thing, how to bridge that again? He just said, well, that means that all of those judgments are simply false. All of them are false. And it seems to me, at least to me, it's like an academic joke. When I say, for example, Hitler is moral monster, that is wrong, according to him, because there are no moral facts. There is no truth maker for this, and all of them are real judgments, real propositions, not just expression of an attitude, emotion, not prescription, but real propositions. So for me, this is not plausible in itself. And what is more important, this wouldn't be a solution for Kant. Why? Because he thinks that judgments of taste are all true if it is real judgment of taste, if it is pure, if all conditions are satisfied, if it is disinterested. It should be true, not false. So quite opposite. All of them are true, not that all of them are false. So it's not a real solution. Quasi-realism by Simon Blackburn is a combination of two theses. I use Hegelian distinction, appearance and essence. So our language, when it comes to moral, it has only cognitivistic appearance. When I say X is morally right or X is morally wrong, it seems like I'm ascribing and claiming something or I'm ascribing a property. But actually, I'm expressing an attitude, expressing an emotion, and maybe prescribing something. But it's non-cognitivistic essence. So question is, how does he know such a thing? So it's a kind of illusion, right? It's just because what is similar, the structure of this proposition. When I say X is morally right and when I say this is rectangular, it seems very similar, and because of that, we are inclined to think that we are claiming something by moral judgments, but we don't. And he also, Simon Blackburn, developed some kind of, maybe this is a huge word, but give some scratch of expressive logic with operators like boo and hooray. and it's not solid logically. No one knows how this function. Those operators are something invented. It's like an ad hoc solution, I would say. So, and he was meta-ethically anti-realist. So that is similar to Kant's position, Kant's prima facie position, I would say. Maybe there is some opportunity to interpret Kant's thesis in a different manner. And I will come to that at the end. So this solution wouldn't be acceptable for Kant, because for him, both appearance and essence are cognitivistic. I mean, you cannot claim that judgments of taste are universally valid without presupposing their real propositions. Universal validity seems like something above truth value of those judgments. So the third solution, I call it, maybe there is another name for this, subjectivist cognitivism. It's cognitivism because when I say X is beautiful, it's a real proposition. But what is truth maker? Truth maker is not some state of affairs consisting in the thing that object is beautiful, that beauty is a real property of the object. But that's state of affairs. So the fact is, my mental state is truth maker. But here, this is problematic. It could be more appealing, but it's problematic because here we confuse causes and effects. Here we don't make distinction between ratio essendi and ratio cognoscendi. It is not the case that a thing is beautiful because I say so, or because I feel so, or because there is some free play between understanding and imagination in my mind. But I say that something is beautiful because it is beautiful, not other way around. So, and I think that this is also important. If we don't make distinction between ratio essendi and ratio cognoscendi, that would be a philosophical mistake, a very important one. We should approach properly to this Euthyphro's dilemma. So the fourth solution, formal purposiveness as a dispositional property. This is, I think, the best one. So it's a bit revisionary, though, because of Kant's explicit claim that beauty is not a property of the thing. But we can understand this as a claim that beauty is not inherent property of the thing. But it could be relational property, it could be dispositional property, it could be something similar to secondary qualities or Gestalt property. So if we understand formal purposiveness, and we have this interpretation in the literature, if we claim that formal purposiveness is a kind of power or ability of an object and intuition of an object to cause in us free play between understanding and imagination, we can say that that is beauty, that is that property. So this is truth maker and everything is okay. So according to the fourth solution, he can be a meta-aesthetic cognitivist and meta-aesthetic realist, but this is just revisionary solution. So that would be enough for Kant's aesthetic metacognitivism. At the end, I will try to connect this with his aesthetic cognitivism. So it is obvious that what Kant says about aesthetic ideas indicates that he supported the first cognitivist thesis, the thesis that art has cognitive value. I will not talk about this. And so Iris has a wonderful book dealing with this question at some point. It could be also argued that the second cognitivist thesis, aesthetic contribution, might be close to his views. But now I want to say something to discuss how that fits with his thesis about aesthetic irrelevance of colors and aesthetic relevance of shapes, his supposed aesthetic formalism. Does it go well? His aesthetic cognitivism with his aesthetic formalism. How colors of an object in our representation influence our aesthetic judging. According to Kant, colors of an object in our representation negatively affect aesthetic judgment. Through charm and emotion, they spoil our judgment and make it interested, whereas disinterestedness conditions its universal validity. So, and that is true for all colors. While shapes, they don't have such negative influence on aesthetic judgment, they are aesthetically preferable. But there is one caveat. If colors emphasize or highlight shapes, they could be preferable, but only instrumentally, not inherently. And this thesis about asymmetry of aesthetic relevance of colors and shapes might seem arbitrary. I don't know whether you agree, but just we can ask ourselves, why would preferring polka dots over stripes be more aesthetically relevant than preferring purple over orange? So in one sense, look at this. Polka dots, black polka dots, white background, black stripes, white background. So when I say polka dots are more beautiful than stripes, or you can say stripes are more preferable than polka dots, that is a real, though comparative, judgment of taste. It could be universally valid. It's a real judgment of taste. But when I say purple is more beautiful than orange, or orange is more beautiful than purple, it's not a real judgment of taste. It's a judgment about agreeable. I should reformulate this to say that I prefer purple over orange. That it doesn't have universal validity. And it seems, to me, this seems very arbitrary. Why preferring polka dots over stripes would be something not objective, but subjectively general. So maybe there are some arguments for this. It's not so arbitrary, though in Kant's epistemology, colors belong to the matter of intuition, while shapes belong to the form of intuition. And matter of intuition is that outside input, and that is a posteriori, while shapes belong to the a priori form of possible intuition, namely space, and that is a priori. And maybe because of this, we can talk about colors, we can give judgments, aesthetic judgment about colors, and that wouldn't be pure aesthetic judgment. But when it comes to shapes, it can have universal validity. And afterwards I found something similar in the literature, I think in Henry Allison's book. This kind of argument. But it's relatively good if you are inclined to accept Kant epistemology. So, if you're not, and he has also some specification of this thesis about colors. So, compound colors are even less favorable than primary ones. And there is additional reason. First, we have that interest. related to charm and emotion, so it's kind of affective or pathological interest. Here we have cognitive interest. When you have compound color, Kant says, you have that question, which color is this? But when you have primary color or pure color, you don't have that question. But it seems this also seems arbitrary because colors are spectrum, and you can ask that question for any color, for any shade. Turquoise, I can ask whether is it really blue, or is it maybe green? And I can ask that question for green as well. Is it green for some nuance, or, for example, color of mustard? Is it green, or it's too yellowish? It's the same. So I suggest an alternative distinction, the distinction between paradigmatic and non-paradigmatic shades of both primary and compound colors. So paradigmatic shades, let's look at what would be paradigmatic shade of, unfortunately, my favorite royal blue is not here, but there is a sky blue. It's not perfect, but for example, sky blue is paradigmatic blue. Royal blue, if you agree, is paradigmatic blue. Pine green is paradigmatic green. Lemon yellow is paradigmatic yellow. Tomato red is paradigmatic red, right? And so for every color you have those paradigmatic shades and non-so-paradigmatic shades. There are more non-paradigmatic shades, of course, than paradigmatic ones. Maybe this would be better, but it's not a solution, because this distinction is contingent and conditioned by our experience. It's also arbitrary. Why sky blue? Why royal blue? There is no some ontological reason, so to say. Why is this paradigmatic and the other shade is not? Is Kant preferring shades over colors? Evidence for his aesthetic formalism. So what is aesthetic formalism? What distinction would be important here? Distinction between colors and shades. This is pretty idiosyncratic, especially if we relate it to Kant's epistemology, or distinction between form and content on the other side, which would be more relevant. I'm inclined to say that this is more relevant. And we also have some contemporary solutions. For example, Nick Zangnall's solution. And according to him, everything which is on the surface manifest properties. The properties which you can grasp directly are formal. And everything else which is external, so context, historical, cultural, history of art, biographical facts, things like this, maybe semantic intentions or categorical intentions of the artist, that is external and that is not formal. And his thesis is that at least some works of art we can understand and evaluate without introducing those external elements. So it's moderate formalism, maybe not all of them, and certainly not all of artworks, but at least some of them. So, and he invented another distinction between contextually situated artworks and historically contextualized artworks. So historically situated, any artwork is historically situated. The very fact that it is written, for example, at some point in the history of literature, that means that it is situated. Everything that happens is situated somewhere in the history of human thought or human history. But not all of them are contextualized historically. Some of them don't need context in order to be understood. So, three very different conceptions of aesthetic formalism. And his positive thesis about shapes. Shapes, we already said why shapes are more preferable than colors. There is that epistemological argument. It is not explicit in Kant's text, but we can reconstruct that. So, but I want to say something about his inclination to reduce formal purposiveness of an object to purposive form, literally understood. When I say purposive form, it is shape of an object. Form in very physical, material sense. And a formal purposiveness is something very abstract. It could be understood as dispositional property, but then colors or motifs could have such a property as well. So he's inclined to make some equivalence between the two. And this is not sound philosophically. And he doesn't need this, because this will return his thought to some kind of objectivism he wasn't inclined toward, or some kind of even generalism, because now he's going to say something very explicit about which shapes are preferable. Irregular shapes, fortunately irregular shapes. There is escape to aesthetic particularism. Because Kant was anti-essentialist, he was particularist, he wasn't generalist, doesn't believe in some canons, norms. It is without concept an object of universal liking. I think that the thesis of purposive form seems like Kant's substitute for a much more viable realist thesis that beauty is a dispositional property and thus has a metaphysical foundation. Why he wasn't inclined. Similar is with Hume. For him, beauty should be a property, dispositional one. Why he avoids this thesis, no one knows why. I said it. So just a little bit about motives, aesthetic ideas, and aesthetic. I think that aesthetic attributes could be understood as motives on the picture. I don't know whether you will agree with this, but motives are something similar to aesthetic attributes. Maybe. Both of them are more concrete than aesthetic ideas, right? Some exemplification or materialization of aesthetic ideas. And now, without much theory, I just want to go through some examples. Jackson Pollock, what do you think? What can think about Jackson Pollock according to this doctrine of colors and shapes and his aesthetic cognitivism concerning aesthetic attributes? And
you can change it to grayscale so we can turn it to grayscale. Illuminate colors.
Yes?
To judge according to Kant, you have to illuminate colors, like no grayscale, so just kidding.
Okay. So, there are no shapes in the real sense. There is no drawing, to be precise. There are shapes, of course. Even monochromatic painting has some shape, but there is no drawing. So yellow, red, black. Some of those colors are primary. Some of those colors are compound here, but yellow and red primary colors. So what would Kant think about this? Not very good. Not very favorable. his attitude wouldn't be, he wouldn't say this is beautiful. He can say this could be agreeable to someone and not to him, that. So we can imagine how his taste, his personal taste was. So what about this? Also primary colors and shapes. What do you think? What would Kant say about it?
Well, here the colors, one of the things they're doing is being used to mark out the shapes.
Mark out the shapes.
And so they might be relevant in this example, just be
and
not the colors themselves, but the colors insofar as they're how we're seeing the shapes.
Yes. Colors emphasize the shape, right? And shape is more important for the Mondrian.
That also seems to imply that it emphasizes the same way for all of us. Like we react, there's a dispositional property, and we all have
the same.
Produces in us the same. But if that is so, then what prevents it from being?
And we can like Rorschach's that test. We can interpret this in different manners. You can say whatever. You can mean anything by this. What is it? Whatever. Or nothing. But for this, is it the same situation when it comes to interpretation and experience? I'm not sure, but for Kant, we have those shapes which are regular but not boring, because the shape of square is boring for him. It's related. It's so related to some goals, some instrumental goals. But this is maybe he would say this is better than the other one. What about this? So Rembrandt's self-portrait. Just remember that 17th paragraph, that ideal of beauty is expression of morality on human's face. Another thesis related to this. Beauty as a symbol of morality, beauty as an expression of aesthetic ideas. So it seems like Kant has different criteria in his doctrine. And according to the doctrine of aesthetic ideas, this is good artwork. Whether it is better than this, probably, as an artwork. And maybe we can make a distinction between aesthetic value here and artistic value. So can we ask ourselves whether Kant was an aesthetic formalist or an aesthetic cognitivist? Is it are two aspects of his doctrine compatible or not? I think that they are. When we have precise answer what kind of formalism it is. Why not? He prefers for some reason, maybe it is idiosyncratic reason, forms over colors, but still what is aesthetically important is the content. Because of aesthetic ideas, and that is quite compatible, different aspects of an artwork. And maybe forms are more important for that content than colors. We can accept that or not, but those theses are not mutually exclusive. That is important. Kant holds, so at the end, I want to say something about the relation between his aesthetic cognitivism and his meta-aesthetic cognitivism. Just to check whether I have enough time. Yes, I have. And this part is just work in progress. Maybe we can add something to this in the future, but we know what was Kant's aesthetic cognitivism and his meta-aesthetic cognitivism. So, because those two theses are on different levels. One is meta-aesthetic claim that judgments of taste that they have truth value. The other one is about artworks and about nature, and that we can learn so much from artworks, and that cognitive and interact with aesthetic or artistic value. So how to connect? There is no inference. We cannot deduce one thesis from another. They are certainly not equivalent. That is obvious. But what is some relate? How can we bridge that gap? If there is a gap, how can we connect those theses? For example, this could be one way to do it. We should start from aesthetic cognitivism, a thesis that we can learn a lot from artworks, and that cognitive content is related to the meaning of artwork. What is real meaning? Maybe it's not equivalent. I'm not sure. Cognitive content and meaning, those two equivalent. But if meaning is so important, because cognitive content is not certainly on the surface. You cannot access it directly, but by interpretation. You should understand work of art in order to see what is the meaning and what is that called, to learn from it. So you need interpretation. And as far as I know, aesthetic cognitivists, they don't think much about interpretation. They need that. It's not just supplementary, but integral to their view. So interpretation is important. Kant, he doesn't have, as far as I know, anything to say about proper interpretation of artworks. He was interested in creating artworks. There is that conception of genius, but when it comes to recipient, he states that thesis that free play between understanding and imagination is sufficient, but it's not for literary work, not for narrative, not for figurative painting. Maybe it is enough for a rose or a tulip or some very simple, maybe still nature, still life. Maybe even that is more demanding and demands interpretation. But we need interpretation in order to grasp that cognitive content, because it's related to the meaning. And I think that this is an aesthetic truism. Everyone should accept this. It's just the fact of our practice. But the second thesis could be more problematic. That is the thesis that interpretation should be relevant, and not just relevant, but more than that. It should be adequate. And I think that it is not enough. Maybe, unfortunately, it's not enough for interpretation to be just plausible or coherent or such thing. It should be true in order to give us that cognitive content. It should be true, because I should correctly understand an artwork in order to gain something. It's not truism. This is debatable. On the other side, you have the thesis that judgments of taste are universally valid. And if you want to say that a judgment is universally valid, when X is a literary work, your interpretation should be correct, because you come to that statement, X is beautiful, true representation, true interpretation. When I say, for example, that Prufrock, you mentioned Prufrock, David.
Oh, yeah.
So the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock is a beautiful poem, and it's full of allusions and from the New and Old Testament, and there is Hamlet there and Shakespeare, different intertextual elements there. You should know this. And not just know this, but think correctly about this in order to give some evaluative judgment which is true and justified as well. It should be justified. So maybe along these lines we can bridge that gap between aesthetic cognitivism and meta-aesthetic cognitivism on the other side. So then that's it. Thank you very much.